Apologize to my daughter for ruining her mood, or leave. My sister said after her 15-year-old threw the gold necklace I bought onto the floor. I wanted diamonds, not this cheap stuff. She scoffed. Mom and Dad smirked. I didn't argue. I returned the necklace, closed their emergency fund, took back every dollar I'd saved, and said, from now on, luxury comes from your own pockets. My name is Andrew. I'm 38 years old, and for the better part of 2 decades, I've been the family safety net nobody bothered to thank. It started small. $100 here when Mom's car needed repairs. $200 there when Dad's dental work wasn't covered. $500 when my sister Angela needed her security deposit. Then it grew. Tuition payments for my niece Melissa. Emergency medical bills. Down payment assistance. Vacation bailouts when their cruise deposit bounced. I kept a ledger at first, back when I was 22 and naive enough to think people tracked favors. By the time I turned 30, the spreadsheet had become depressing, so I stopped updating it. The last entry I bothered recording showed $127,000 in transfers, loans that were never repaid, and bills I'd quietly absorbed to keep the peace. Angela called me her dependable baby brother in public, always with that affectionate tone that made strangers smile. In private, I was the backup plan she contacted when her own checking account ran dry. Mom called me her rock. Dad called me practical. None of them called me when good news arrived, only when problems needed solving with my credit card. Melissa turned 15 next week. Angela had been planning her birthday celebration for months, talking endlessly about themes and decorations and a guest list that included half her daughter's school. Every family gathering for the past 3 months featured updates about the party, about how special it needed to be, about how Melissa deserved the absolute best. I listened during those dinners, nodding at appropriate moments while Angela described the catering she'd booked and the photographer she'd hired. I noticed nobody asked how I planned to contribute. They simply assumed I would. The unspoken expectation hung in every conversation, invisible but absolutely present. So I went to the jeweler on Tuesday afternoon during my lunch break. The shop specialized in custom pieces, the kind of place where sales associates remembered your name and offered espresso while you browsed. I explained what I wanted. Something meaningful for a 15-year-old. Something she could wear now but treasure later. Something that marked the milestone without being ostentatious. The jeweler showed me 3 options. I chose the 18-karat gold necklace with the delicate pendant, a small infinity symbol embedded with tiny sapphires. The piece was elegant, age-appropriate, and cost more than my first car. The jeweler wrapped it in cream-colored paper, placed it in a velvet box, and assured me any teenage girl would be thrilled. I carried it home that evening, feeling satisfied, feeling like maybe this time, someone would notice the thought I'd put into the gesture. Maybe this time, the gift would earn something beyond polite obligation. The party was Saturday. Angela had rented a private room at an upscale restaurant, the kind with cloth napkins and prefix menus. She'd sent a group text 2 weeks earlier with the dress code. Semi-formal. No jeans. No sneakers. Arrived by 6:30 sharp. I ironed my shirt Friday night, double-checking the collar and cuffs. I placed the velvet box in my jacket pocket, wrapped and ready. I set 3 alarms to ensure I wouldn't be late. Saturday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures. I drove to the restaurant early, parking 2 blocks away to avoid the valet charge. The gift box pressed against my ribs as I walked, a small weight that felt heavier with each step. The private dining room glowed with string lights Angela had brought from home. Metallic balloons clustered in corners, their ribbons trailing across hardwood floors. A dessert table dominated one wall, stacked with cupcakes arranged in an elaborate tower. The photographer Angela hired circulated among guests, capturing candid moments that would later flood social media. I arrived at 6:25, 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Angela stood near the entrance, greeting arrivals with theatrical enthusiasm. She wore a silver dress that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. Her hair was styled in perfect waves, the kind that required professional help. She saw me and smiled, the expression friendly but distant. Andrew, you made it. Go find your seat. We're doing gifts after dinner. I found my place card at a table near the back, positioned beside Dad's younger brother and his wife, relatives I saw maybe twice a year. Mom and Dad sat at the main table with Angela, her husband Kenneth, and Melissa, who wore a sparkly dress and a birthday sash that caught the light with every movement. Dinner proceeded in predictable stages. Appetizers arrived. Conversations hummed. The photographer snapped pictures of Melissa laughing with her friends, of Angela adjusting her daughter's sash, of the whole family raising glasses for a toast I couldn't quite hear from my distant table. The main course came and went. Servers cleared plates efficiently, their movements synchronized and professional. Then Angela stood, tapping a fork against her wine glass until the room quieted. "Gift time," she announced, her voice bright with excitement. "Melissa, sweetheart, come up here." Melissa approached the gift table, her friends clustering nearby with phones ready to record. The first few presents were typical teenage fare. Gift cards, makeup sets, a designer purse that earned squeals of approval. Each item received enthusiastic reactions. Thank yous delivered to the camera with practiced grace. Then Angela picked up my contribution, the velvet box now sitting among torn wrapping paper and discarded ribbons. She handed it to Melissa with a smile. "This one's from Uncle Andrew." I felt my shoulders straighten automatically. The room's attention shifted briefly in my direction before returning to Melissa as she opened the box. She lifted the necklace slowly, holding it up to examine the pendant. The infinity symbol caught the restaurant's ambient lighting, sapphires glinting subtly. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, I thought I saw appreciation in her expression. Then her face changed. Her nose wrinkled slightly, disappointment replacing curiosity. She looked at the necklace the way someone might examine a gift receipt for a present they intended to return. "Gold." The word came out flat, almost confused. She lowered the necklace, letting it dangle from one finger like something contaminated. Her friends leaned in, their expressions shifting to match hers. One girl whispered something I couldn't hear. Another giggled softly. Melissa's disappointment hardened into something closer to disdain. She held the necklace at arm's length, her teenage judgment absolute and merciless. Then she dropped it. The necklace hit the hardwood floor with a soft metallic sound, the chain pooling in a small golden circle near her feet. Nobody moved to pick it up. The photographer's camera clicked, capturing the moment for posterity. Melissa looked directly at me, her expression communicating exactly what she thought of my gift. "I wanted diamonds, not this cheap stuff." The room went silent. Not the respectful quiet that follows a heartfelt toast, but the uncomfortable stillness that appears when someone crosses a line nobody expected. Several guests shifted in their seats. Melissa's friends exchanged glances, suddenly uncertain whether they should laugh or look away. I waited for Angela to correct her daughter, to remind Melissa about gratitude, about basic manners, about the appropriate way to receive a gift regardless of personal preference. I waited for someone at that main table to acknowledge that a 15-year-old had just called an 18-karat gold necklace cheap while throwing it onto a restaurant floor. Angela crossed her arms instead. Her expression shifted from surprise to something harder, more defensive. She looked at me with an edge I recognized from childhood arguments, the older sister's stance that meant she'd chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. "Apologize to my daughter for ruining her mood," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "Or leave." Mom and Dad sat on either side of Angela, their reactions unfolding in synchronized silence. Dad's mouth curved into a small smirk, the expression he wore when he found something privately amusing. Mom's face held a similar energy, entertained rather than appalled, watching the situation unfold like it was dinner theater arranged for her benefit. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them suggested Melissa should apologize for her behavior. Neither of them acknowledged that their granddaughter had just publicly rejected a gift that cost more than their last 3 months of groceries combined. I sat perfectly still, the restaurant's ambient noise returning gradually as guests resumed quiet conversations. My jacket suddenly felt too warm. The table's edge pressed against my palms where I'd placed my hands to steady myself. Angela waited, her crossed arms and raised eyebrow making her expectation clear. Apologize or leave. Those were my options, delivered in front of 50 witnesses with cameras ready to document whatever happened next. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against hardwood. Every eye in the room tracked my movement, curiosity mixing with secondhand embarrassment. I walked to where the necklace lay abandoned on the floor, its 18-karat gold catching light that seemed too bright, too exposing. I picked it up carefully, letting the chain slide through my fingers before placing it back in the velvet box. The sapphires still glinted. The craftsmanship remained impeccable. Nothing about the necklace had changed except everyone's perception of it, judged and dismissed by a teenager who thought gold meant cheap. I closed the box with a soft click that felt louder than it should have. Then I walked toward the exit, my footsteps measured and deliberate. I didn't look at Angela. I didn't acknowledge my parents' matching smirks or Melissa's satisfied expression. I simply left, the velvet box secure in my jacket pocket, worth $1,200 that my niece would never wear. I drove home in silence, the radio off, the city lights blurring past my windshield. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, knuckles pale against the dark leather. The velvet box sat in my passenger seat where I'd placed it after starting the car, a small reminder of the evening's humiliation. The jeweler's shop wouldn't open until Monday morning. I'd have to wait 2 days before I could return the necklace. 2 days of looking at that cream-colored wrapping paper and remembering Melissa's disgusted expression as she let it fall. I parked in my building's garage and rode the elevator to my floor, the mechanical hum filling space that thoughts hadn't quite occupied yet. My apartment waited exactly as I'd left it. Clean counters, organized shelves, everything in its designated place, the careful order I maintained because control over my environment was control over something. I set the velvet box on my kitchen counter and stared at it for a long moment. Then I opened my laptop. The emergency fund account appeared first when I logged into my banking portal. I'd established it 6 years ago, shortly after Dad's unexpected hospital stay left him with bills insurance wouldn't cover. Angela had called me panicking, talking about collectors and credit scores and how they needed help immediately. I'd opened a high-yield savings account that night, seeding it with $10,000 and setting up automatic monthly transfers. The balance had grown steadily since then. $15,000, $20,000, $35,000. Every month, $300 moved from my checking account into that safety net, money my family could access during emergencies. And they had accessed it 7 times in 6 years. Medical copays, car repairs, Kenneth's business setback that required a bridge loan, the cruise deposit Angela needed when her credit card was maxed. None of those withdrawals had been repaid. I'd never asked for repayment, never mentioned the growing imbalance between what I contributed and what they took. That's what family did, I told myself. Family helped without keeping score. Current balance showed $42,816.43. I opened a second window, pulling up the shared access permissions I'd set up years ago. Angela had her own login credentials. So did Mom. Emergency access, I called it, just in case something happened and they needed funds quickly. My cursor hovered over the account management settings. I thought about Melissa's face as she examined the necklace. The disappointment that had curdled into contempt. The casual cruelty of calling something cheap without understanding its value. I thought about Angela's crossed arms, her ultimatum delivered like I'd been the one behaving inappropriately. I thought about my parents' smirks, entertained by my public humiliation, amused that their son had been put in his place. I clicked into the permissions panel and began removing access. Angela's credentials first, then Mom's. 2 confirmations, 2 acknowledgments that these users would no longer be able to view or withdraw from the account. Then I initiated a transfer. $42,816.43, moved from the emergency fund into my primary savings account. The transaction processed in seconds, leaving the original account empty except for the minimum balance required to keep it open. I closed that window and opened another. My personal records, the financial tracking I'd abandoned years ago when the numbers became too depressing. I'd kept the files, though, backed up across 3 different drives, a comprehensive history of every dollar I'd sent to my family since I'd started working at 21. Rent assistance for Angela's first apartment, for $1,700. Mom and Dad's property tax shortfall, $3,200. Melissa's private school tuition, grades 6 through 9, $68,000 across 4 years. Kenneth's business startup loan, $15,000. Angela's car down payment, $7,000. Medical bills, utility payments, insurance premiums, emergency travel costs. The spreadsheet entries continued for pages. Each line represented a crisis I'd solved, a problem I'd fixed, a need I'd met without being asked because asking would have meant admitting they needed help. The total sat at the bottom of the final page, $234,612. Nearly $250,000 transferred over 17 years, an amount that could have purchased a house, funded my own business, created the kind of financial security people spent decades building. Instead, it had funded my sister's lifestyle, supported my parents' retirement gap, and paid for a private school education for a niece who thought gold was cheap. I leaned back in my chair, staring at that number until the screen's backlight created ghosting in my peripheral vision. $234,000, given freely, never repaid, never acknowledged beyond casual thank yous that felt more obligatory than genuine. The apartment was too quiet. I could hear my own breathing, could hear the refrigerator's subtle hum, could hear traffic sounds filtering up from the street below. Normal sounds. Regular sounds. The same sounds I'd heard every night for the past 8 years living in this apartment I'd bought without my family's help because I'd been too busy funding their needs to ask for their support. I pulled up my monthly budget next, the spreadsheet I updated religiously every paycheck. Income appeared in green, expenses in black, savings in blue. And there, in red, the family contribution line that had persisted for 17 years, $300 monthly into the emergency fund, plus irregular amounts marked as loans, gifts, or assistance. I selected that entire category and changed the amount to 0. Then I opened my email and began drafting messages I wouldn't send until Monday. One to the jeweler, requesting a return appointment. One to my bank, confirming the access changes I'd just made. One to my financial advisor, asking about trust structures and asset protection strategies I should have implemented years ago. The velvet box still sat on my kitchen counter, a $1,200 reminder that value and appreciation weren't the same thing. That generosity without boundaries was just another word for exploitation. That being dependable had somehow become synonymous with being disposable. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply sat in my quiet apartment, surrounded by the order I'd created, and began calculating exactly how much luxury would cost when it came from their own pockets instead of mine. Monday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that follows sleepless nights spent making decisions. I'd barely dozed, my mind replaying scenes from Saturday, while simultaneously running calculations about what came next. By sunrise, I'd showered, dressed in my best suit, and prepared a list of stops organized by location and priority. The jeweler's shop opened at 9. I arrived at 8:55, the velvet box in my jacket pocket, the receipt I'd carefully preserved in my wallet. The same sales associate who'd helped me greeted me with professional warmth that faded slightly when I explained my purpose. "I need to return this," I said, placing the box on the glass counter. "Unworn, original packaging, purchased 6 days ago." She opened the box carefully, examining the necklace with practiced eyes. The gold gleamed under the shop's specialized lighting, those small sapphires catching illumination just as they had Saturday night. Perfect condition. 0 wear. "May I ask if there was a problem with the piece?" The recipient found it inappropriate for her taste. The associate's expression shifted, subtle but noticeable. She'd probably heard every excuse people invented for returns. She processed the refund without additional questions, crediting my account the full $1,200 within minutes. The transaction completed with efficient professionalism, and I left the shop $1,200 richer, carrying nothing. Stop 2 was my bank's main branch, a 20-minute drive through morning traffic. I'd scheduled an appointment with my account manager, a woman named Margaret who'd helped me establish my first savings account when I was 23. She greeted me in a small conference room, coffee already waiting, her professional demeanor communicating this wasn't a casual visit. "I need to restructure several accounts," I said, sliding a handwritten list across the table. "Close joint access on these. Establish transfer blocks on these. And I'd like to discuss trust options for long-term asset protection." Margaret reviewed the list carefully, her expression neutral but her silence suggesting she understood the implications. Families fought about money more than any other topic. She'd probably facilitated dozens of similar conversations, children protecting assets from parents, siblings cutting off access after disputes. "The emergency fund account currently has joint access holders," she confirmed. "You've already revoked their digital permissions, but we should formalize that with updated signature cards and clear documentation that you're the sole account holder with full authority." We spent 90 minutes working through paperwork. New signature cards. Access revocations. transfer restriction protocols that prevented anyone except me from moving money between my accounts. Margaret explained trust structures, asset protection vehicles, and estate planning strategies I should have implemented years ago. One more thing, I said as we finished. I need to review all standing automated transfers from my accounts. Everything outgoing that isn't a bill in my name. She pulled up the list on her computer screen, rotating the monitor so I could see clearly. Monthly transfers appeared in chronological order, some dating back years. 300 to the emergency fund. 150 to Angela's personal account, labeled as allowance though I couldn't remember when or why I'd started that. 75 to Mom and Dad's checking account, initiated 5 years ago during a rough financial patch that had apparently never ended. Cancel all of these, I said, pointing to the family transfers. Effective immediately. Margaret made notes, her pen moving quickly across her legal pad. These will stop processing before the next scheduled date. You'll receive confirmation emails for each cancellation. I left the bank at noon with restructured accounts, revoked access credentials, and stopped transfers that had been flowing outward for years. The administrative work felt strangely satisfying. Each signature and initial a small declaration that the old patterns had ended. Stop 3 was a consultation with an attorney my colleague had recommended. Estate planning, he'd called it, though what I really needed was protection planning. The lawyer's office occupied the 15th floor of a downtown building, all glass walls and minimal furniture that communicated expensive expertise. I explained my situation in clinical terms. Family members with access to emergency funds. Years of financial support without repayment agreements. Recent conflict that prompted reevaluation of those arrangements. The attorney listened without judgment, taking occasional notes, asking clarifying questions about amounts and timelines. You need a formal revocable living trust, he said when I finished. Transfer your major assets into the trust. Name yourself as trustee and primary beneficiary, and establish clear terms for any future disbursements to family members. Documentation protects you legally and creates clean boundaries. We discussed fees, timelines, and paperwork requirements. The process would take 6 weeks to complete properly, including asset appraisals and title transfers. I authorized him to begin immediately, signing a retainer agreement that felt like armor against future exploitation. Wednesday afternoon, I sat in my apartment's small home office, surrounded by folders I'd pulled from storage. Receipts, bank statements, email confirmations, every piece of documentation proving 17 years of financial support. I'd organized everything chronologically, creating a timeline that showed exactly when money had flowed and where it had gone. Tuition payments for Melissa appeared in clusters, fall and spring semesters marked clearly. Medical bills from Dad's surgery, itemized and dated. Rent assistance for Angela, documented in canceled checks and bank transfers. The cruise deposit bounced back, complete with the overdraft notice that had prompted my emergency payment. I created digital copies of everything, scanning documents into organized folders on my laptop's hard drive. Then I created backups, storing copies on 2 separate external drives, and uploading encrypted versions to secure cloud storage. Evidence, I thought. Proof of generosity. Documentation that I'd fulfilled family obligations far beyond reasonable expectations. My phone had been relatively quiet since Saturday night. One text from Angela on Sunday afternoon, asking if I was still upset about Melissa's reaction. Not apologizing. Not acknowledging her daughter's behavior. Just checking if I'd recovered from being upset, as though my emotional response was the problem rather than the public humiliation itself. I hadn't responded. The message sat in my phone's notification panel, unread according to the delivery confirmation, a small act of silence that probably irritated her more than any argument would have. No calls from Mom or Dad. No follow-up from Melissa. No acknowledgement that Saturday's events had crossed lines that normally prompted family conversations about behavior and boundaries. Their silence communicated everything I needed to know about how they viewed the situation. I was the one expected to apologize, to smooth things over, to pretend expensive gifts could be discarded without consequence, to maintain my role as the dependable one who absorbed insults and continued providing support regardless of how he was treated. That role ended Saturday night when the necklace hit the floor. They just didn't know it yet. The call came Thursday evening while I was preparing dinner. My phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, Angela's name appearing on the screen with a photo from some family gathering years ago. We were both smiling in the picture, arms around each other's shoulders, looking like siblings who actually enjoyed spending time together. I let it ring 3 times before answering, placing her on speaker while I continued chopping vegetables for a stir-fry. "Andrew," finally, she said, her tone suggesting I'd been avoiding her rather than simply not prioritizing her single text message. "We need to talk about Saturday." "Okay." The single word seemed to catch her off guard. She paused, probably expecting me to jump in with apologies or explanations. When I didn't, she continued, "Melissa feels terrible about how things went. You know how teenagers are. Emotional, dramatic, they say things without thinking. She didn't mean to hurt your feelings." I set down my knife, wiping my hands on a kitchen towel. "Did she say that? Or are you saying that for her?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'm saying she's 15, Andrew. 15-year-olds aren't known for their tact. You can't hold her to adult standards." "I'm not holding her to any standards. I gave her a gift. She didn't like it. That's fine. She's entitled to her preferences." "Then why did you leave like that? You made this huge dramatic scene, walking out in front of all her friends and the photographer. Do you know how awkward that was for her?" "For me." I moved to the stove, adjusting the heat under my pan. Oil shimmered, ready for vegetables. "I left because you told me to apologize or leave. I chose to leave." "I didn't actually mean you should leave, Andrew. I was upset. You embarrassed Melissa with that gift, and I reacted defensively. But you know how family works. We have arguments. We move past them." She threw a $1,200 necklace on the floor and called it cheap. How exactly did I embarrass her? Silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of vegetables hitting hot oil on my end. I heard Angela exhale slowly, the particular sound she made when she was trying to control her temper. "See, this is the problem," she said finally. "You're fixating on the money instead of understanding the emotional situation." Melissa had expectations. She'd been talking about getting diamonds for months. Mom and Dad knew. I knew. Everyone knew except apparently you. And then you show up with gold like that's some amazing gift, and she's supposed to just pretend she's thrilled? She could have said thank you and set it aside. Basic manners don't require pretending anything. She's 15, and I'm 38, which means I'm old enough to decide I don't have to accept being treated like garbage by a teenager or anyone else. Angela's voice shifted, taking on the edge she used when logical arguments weren't working and emotional manipulation became the backup plan. "This is really about Saturday, isn't it? You're punishing a child because you felt embarrassed in front of people. That's pretty petty, Andrew." I added sauce to my vegetables, the sizzle momentarily loud enough to require raising my voice. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm making decisions about my own boundaries." "Boundaries," she repeated, the word dripping with sarcasm. "Since when do you have boundaries with family? You've never cared about boundaries before. You've always been there when we needed you. Maybe that's the problem." The sentence landed harder than I'd intended, truth slipping out before I could soften it. Angela went quiet again, and I heard muffled sounds suggesting she'd covered her phone's microphone to talk to someone else. Kenneth, probably, getting real-time updates on a conversation that wasn't going the way she'd planned. When she came back, her tone had changed again. Softer now, conciliatory. "Look, I'm sorry Saturday got out of hand." "I am. Melissa's sorry too, even if she hasn't said it yet. Can we just move past this? Maybe you could come over for dinner this weekend. We could talk things through properly, and everything can go back to normal." "What's normal?" "Don't be difficult. You know what I mean. We're family. Family doesn't hold grudges." I turned off the stove, my dinner ready, but my appetite suddenly uncertain. Family also doesn't demand apologies from the person who brought a gift to someone who threw it on the ground. But apparently we have different definitions of family. So that's it. You're just going to be angry forever? Cut us off over one incident at a birthday party. I haven't cut anyone off. I returned a necklace nobody wanted, and I'm adjusting how I manage my finances. Neither of those things affects you unless there's something you're not saying. I heard her sharp intake of breath, the realization starting to form. "What do you mean, adjusting your finances?" "Exactly what I said. I'm restructuring my accounts, updating access permissions, establishing better boundaries around my money. Standard financial planning stuff. My advisor recommended it. The emergency fund." Her voice had gone flat, accusatory. "You did something to the emergency fund?" "I moved my money into my personal savings account, yes." It's my money, Angela. It's the family emergency fund. That's not just your money. That's all of our money for when things go wrong. No, I said quietly. It was my money that I made available for family emergencies. There's a difference. And I've decided that arrangement no longer works for me. You can't just take that away. Mom and Dad count on that fund. I count on that fund. What happens if Kenneth's business has another setback? What happens if someone gets sick? The same thing that happens to everyone else who doesn't have an emergency fund. You figure it out with your own resources. Her voice rose, anger replacing manipulation. This is because Melissa didn't like your necklace? You're really going to punish our entire family financially because a 15-year-old hurt your feelings. This is because I've spent 17 years providing financial support without acknowledgement, appreciation, or basic respect. Saturday just made it clear that pattern needed to end. 17 years? Andrew, we've always appreciated you. You're being ridiculous. When was the last time anyone repaid a loan I gave them? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. I heard her struggling for a response, probably running through memories trying to find a single instance of repayment she could cite. That's different, she said finally. That wasn't loans, that was family helping family. You never asked for repayment. You're right. I didn't ask, but I'm done giving. I ended the call before she could respond, pressing the red button with a finality that felt both terrifying and liberating. My dinner sat cooling on the stove, vegetables and sauce that probably tasted fine but looked unappealing in my current state. My phone immediately started buzzing with texts. Angela, sending paragraph-length messages about family loyalty and how I was making a huge mistake. Then Mom's name appeared, her text shorter but equally accusatory. Dad chimed in 5 minutes later, his message suggesting I was being childish and needed to reconsider my attitude. I muted the conversation thread and finished my dinner in silence, each bite mechanical and tasteless. Outside my kitchen window, the city continued its evening routine, lights flickering on in other apartments, people living lives that didn't include ungrateful nieces or entitled sisters or parents who smirked while their son got humiliated. Somewhere in those other apartments, other families probably supported each other without keeping score, probably gave gifts that got appreciated, probably built relationships where respect flowed both directions. That wasn't my family. Maybe it never had been. Saturday's necklace hitting the floor had just made it impossible to pretend otherwise. I spent Saturday morning assembling documentation I'd already organized. Bank statements highlighting every family transfer, receipts from jewelry stores, tuition payments, medical bills. Email confirmations from emergency transfers made at midnight when crises couldn't wait for morning. 17 years of financial history compiled into a single folder, both digital and physical. The physical version sat on my coffee table, a red accordion file stuffed with papers organized chronologically. The digital version lived on my laptop, backed up across multiple drives, encrypted and secured. Both versions told the same story. Dependable Andrew, always available, always willing to help, never questioning where the money went or whether it would return. $234,612, itemized and proven. I didn't know yet what I'd do with this evidence. Maybe nothing. Maybe it just needed to exist, proof that my memory of events was accurate and my reaction to Saturday's humiliation was proportionate to years of accumulated disrespect. Or maybe someday, when someone asked why I'd withdrawn support, I'd simply hand them the folder and let the numbers speak. The first bill bounced on Tuesday. Melissa's private school tuition, the spring semester payment I'd quietly handled for 4 consecutive years. The bursar's office sent an automated email to Angela and Kenneth, informing them their payment method had been declined and their daughter's enrollment was at risk. Angela called me 6 times that day. I didn't answer. Thursday brought the second bounce. Mom and Dad's property insurance, the annual premium I'd been paying since they'd struggled 3 years ago and never resumed. The lapse notice arrived with firm language about coverage termination and liability exposure. Dad texted, asking if there was a problem with my bank. I didn't respond. The following Monday, Angela's gym membership suspended for non-payment. The streaming services I'd added to my family account all disappeared, logins suddenly invalid. Kenneth's professional association dues bounced, jeopardizing his license renewal. The group text thread exploded with panic and accusations. How could I do this? Family was supposed to help family. This was financial abuse over a teenage girl's honest reaction to a gift. I muted the thread and continued my week, watching the cascade unfold with clinical detachment. Each bounced payment, each suspended service, each panicked message represented a luxury they'd enjoyed while calling me dependable, while assuming my wallet was always open, while smirking when their daughter threw my gift onto a restaurant floor. I moved 3 months after Saturday's party. A better apartment in a quieter neighborhood, the kind of place I could have afforded years earlier if I hadn't been funding everyone else's needs. The lease signing felt like victory, my name alone on the documents, my bank account funding the deposit without consultations or emergency fund withdrawals. The family texts had stopped after week 6, when Angela finally accepted I wasn't responding and Mom told her to leave me alone until I came to my senses. Dad sent one final message suggesting I was throwing away family over pride. I archived it without reading completely. Melissa turned 16 without my acknowledgement. Angela's Christmas card went unanswered. Dad's birthday passed without my usual call. The red folder stayed packed in a box I hadn't opened since moving. I didn't need it anymore. The evidence had served its purpose by existing, by proving my decisions were rational rather than emotional, justified rather than petty. Sometimes I thought about the necklace hitting the floor, about how one moment of teenage cruelty had revealed years of accumulated disrespect. Other times I just enjoyed the silence of my new apartment, the peace that came from boundaries enforced and expectations reset. From now on, luxury came from their own pockets. And my pockets stayed closed, finally serving only me.